You are encased in steel, every joint locked, every strap pulled tight, and your bladder is about to burst. This isn't a hypothetical. This was the daily reality for thousands of armored knights across medieval Europe. Between roughly 1100 and 1500 AD, a fully outfitted knight wore between 40 and 60 pounds of plate armor, sometimes for hours on end during tournaments, sieges, and long marches. And yet almost nobody talks about the most basic human problem these men faced. How did they actually go to the bathroom? The short answer is, it was complicated, sometimes humiliating, and occasionally dangerous. The long answer tells you more about medieval life than any battlefield story ever could. Let's start with the armor itself. By the 14th century, a complete suit of plate armor was not one single piece you slipped on like a costume. It was dozens of individual steel components. Breastplate, backplate, pauldrons covering the shoulders, vambraces on the arms, cuisses protecting the thighs, greaves on the shins, and a helmet that could restrict both vision and breathing. Each piece was connected by leather straps, buckles, and sliding rivets that allowed limited movement. Alan Williams, a metallurgist who analyzed hundreds of surviving armor specimens in his book The Knight and the Blast Furnace, found that plate thickness varied from about 1 millimeter on the limbs to nearly 3 millimeters on the chest. That's a lot of metal, but it was shaped to distribute weight across the whole body. The system worked remarkably well for fighting. It worked considerably less well for bodily functions. There was no zipper, no fly, no quick-release mechanism built into medieval armor for the purpose of urination or defecation. This was not an engineering oversight. Knights and their armorers simply had other priorities. Survival came first. Comfort came a distant third, somewhere after looking impressive. So what actually happened? For urination, the most common solution was the most obvious one. You either removed enough armor to access your clothing underneath, or you used what historians sometimes call an anatomical gap. Full plate armor was never truly airtight. Ffoulkes, the skirt-like section of steel plates hanging below the breastplate, was made of overlapping horizontal lames designed to allow the rider to sit on horseback. These lames could be lifted or shifted. Beneath the armor, a knight wore padded garments called a gambeson or arming doublet, and beneath that, linen braies, loose medieval underpants that tied at the waist with a drawstring. The process, simplified, was this. You lifted the ffoulkes, untied or shifted the braies, and did what nature demanded. Messy sometimes, impossible, no. But here's the part that changes the whole picture. A knight rarely armored himself alone. Squires, servants, and armorers existed for exactly this reason. The 15th-century Italian fighting master Fiore de' Liberi, in his combat treatise Flos Duelatorum written around 1409, describes the extensive teamwork required to don and doff a full harness. That's the medieval term for a complete suit of armor. It was a process that could take 20 to 30 minutes with help, or significantly longer without it. This means bathroom breaks during extended operations were not just uncomfortable, they were logistically complicated. You needed at least one other person to help you partially disassemble your own body armor before you could relieve yourself. Tobias Capwell, curator of arms and armor at the Wallace Collection in London, and one of the foremost modern experts on medieval plate armor, has noted that knights on campaign developed practical strategies for managing bodily needs. The simplest approach was to plan around it. You ate and drank carefully before battle. You limited fluid intake during long tournaments. This sounds extreme until you realize that medieval people in general, not just knights, operated their entire lives around the timing of bodily functions in ways modern people have entirely forgotten. But planning only goes so far. During a siege that lasted days or weeks, a knight mounted on the walls of a castle could not simply walk away to find privacy. During a tournament joust, you sat on horseback in full view of thousands of spectators. And during a long march, stopping to fully unarmor was both time-consuming and tactically dangerous. The consequences of getting this wrong were real. Medieval medical texts, including the influential health regimen compiled by the 13th-century physician Aldobrandino of Siena, warned extensively about the dangers of holding urine too long. Aldobrandino, drawing on earlier Arabic and Greek medical traditions, described how retained fluids could cause fevers, bladder stones, and what he called corruption of the humors. While humoral theory was medically inaccurate, the underlying observation was correct. Urinary tract infections, kidney stones, and bladder complications were genuine health risks. and prolonged suppression of urination made them worse. Knights who regularly spent long hours in full armor without adequate relief were, medically speaking, courting real problems. For defecation, the situation was even less dignified. There is no subtle way to describe this. A knight who needed to defecate while in armor had to have significant portions of the armor removed. At minimum, the lower backplate, the fald, and often the cuisses covering the thighs. This could not be done quickly. It absolutely could not be done alone. And in a military context, it could not be done without leaving yourself partially unprotected. Medieval chroniclers occasionally recorded incidents where knights were caught off guard during personal moments. The implication was always the same: vulnerability. A knight without his full armor was a target. Some sources suggest that knights on extended campaigns simply accepted a degree of filth. The Luttrell Psalter, an English illuminated manuscript from around 1325 to 1340 that depicts detailed scenes of daily medieval life, shows soldiers and workers in conditions that suggest hygiene was a luxury, not a standard. When you were in the field for weeks, you lived with the dirt. You slept in your padding. You ate when you could. And yes, you soiled yourself when there was no alternative. This was not considered remarkable. It was considered war. But what about the battlefield itself? Here, the calculus changed entirely. During active combat, nobody stopped for a bathroom break. Adrenaline suppresses the urge to urinate and defecate. This is a well-documented physiological response that modern combat medics still observe today. Your body has more immediate priorities than waste elimination when it believes you might die. Knights in the heat of battle rarely experience the need to go. The problem came afterward, when the adrenaline faded and the body remembered its other demands. After a battle, the process of removing armor was often done in stages, and bodily relief was one of the first priorities. Accounts from the aftermath of battles like Agincourt in 1415, where English and French knights fought in exhausting conditions of mud and rain, describe soldiers in states of complete physical collapse. The French knights, many of whom had marched for miles in full-plate armor and then fought for hours, were reportedly so exhausted and dehydrated that some collapsed and suffocated in the mud, their armor pinning them face down. While this is partly a story about the horrors of medieval combat, it is also a story about the physical reality of being encased in metal. Your armor protected you from swords. It did not protect you from your own body's needs. Charles F. Ffoulkes, the first curator of the Tower of London's armories in the early 20th century, documented numerous historical suits of armor and noted design features that modern viewers often overlook. Some later suits of armor, particularly those from the late 15th and early 16th centuries, included subtle design accommodations for sitting, bending, and bodily functions. The articulated lames at the waist became more flexible. The shape of the cuirass evolved to allow deeper breathing and more comfortable sitting. These were not explicitly marketed as bathroom-friendly features, but they reflected an ongoing conversation between the knight's body and his metal shell. Tournament armor was specifically different from field armor. It was often heavier, more restrictive, and designed for a specific type of combat rather than general survival. Some tournament helmets had no breathing holes at all, relying on the air trapped inside. Knights wearing this equipment for display matches that lasted hours developed their own strategies, which likely included very deliberate fluid management before events and rapid assistance from squires during breaks. There's another dimension to this that rarely appears in popular history: the smell. A knight who had been in armor for a long day, sweating through padding, possibly soiled, certainly unwashed by modern standards, would have smelled extremely unpleasant. Medieval people were aware of this. Courtesy manuals from the 13th and 14th centuries, including those studied by historian Ruth Mazo Karras, an expert on medieval social history at the University of Minnesota, discuss personal cleanliness and social expectations around odor. Knights and nobles were expected to manage their hygiene through changes of linen, the use of herbal waters, and regular washing of undergarments, even when full bathing was impractical. The arming doublet worn beneath armor was often changed between events for exactly this reason. So what's the real takeaway here? It's not that medieval knights were dirty or stupid or poorly designed for. They were operating within a system where personal comfort was subordinated to survival, social display, and military function. The armor that protected them also imprisoned them in small, undignified ways that history books love to ignore. And the solutions they developed: careful planning, personal servants, deliberate dehydration, and sheer acceptance of discomfort, reveal a relationship with the human body that is profoundly different from the one you live with today. You complain when your phone takes 3 seconds to load. A knight once held his bladder for 6 hours because stopping meant risking death. The next time you find yourself in a situation where the bathroom is slightly inconvenient, a long car ride, a movie theater, a meeting that runs over, consider this. For roughly 400 years, thousands of men across Europe strapped on steel every single day and simply hoped their bodies would cooperate. Most of the time, they managed. Sometimes they didn't. And nobody wrote poems about that part.